It's the Not For Long podcast with Mike Gill, Colin Thompson, and producer Hunter Brody. Remember to rate, review, and subscribe.
What's up, everybody, and welcome into the Not For Long Sports podcast. This is a podcast that will look at working in the sports field, every aspect of the sports field, whether it be in sports radio, television, being an actual professional athlete, working in front offices. It will look at business of sports. It will look at different topics in sports that get touched on more than the game. Stuff like pay for play in college, stuff like, the draft process. Should NBA players be allowed to leave early? Stuff like that. So we'll be tackling topics from all over with a spin on working in the actual sports medium. A lot of people out there listening to this will think, man, working in sports is pretty cool. And it is a cool job. But how did we all get here? We all took different roads to get here. And what we want to try to accomplish, Mike Gill, Colin Thompson, and our producer, Hunter Brody, have all worked in sports coming from different avenues. And what we want to try to do for our listeners is help teach you ways to get there, how we got there, and also discuss these topics that are very interesting and intriguing to all of us. So I'm going to first introduce Colin Thompson. He's a guy who has worked in sports media. He has been a player at the professional level. He's also been a high-level Division I football player. So, Colin, why don't you tell our listeners and viewers a little bit about your road to working in sports?
Yeah, guys, I'm really excited to work with you guys, Hunter and Mike. It's been a pleasure getting to know you guys through a radio station that's near to us, and that's 97.3 ESPN, and that's what brought us together. Crazy, but that's what's brought us together through our roads of years and years of experience of playing the sport, now working in the media of the sport, doing a little bit of everything in sports. So that's what's brought us together, and it's a pretty cool thing, and that's how we generated this podcast. But so for me, I'll just start what I'm doing right now. First and foremost, that's training. It's a full-time job. I'm trying to get back into the NFL.
By the way, a full-time job that you don't get paid for.
No, full-time job I don't get paid for, pay for gym fees, everything, nutrition, meal preparation, try to mimic everything that I did in a facility for years. And I'll dive into those things coming up here in a little bit. But I try to mimic exactly what I do on a day-to-day basis by working 4 or 5 jobs as well and paying my dues with those 4 or 5 jobs to get where I want to go off the field, but also on the field. So I'm doing a lot of 97.3. I'm a contributor on Mike's show, The Sports Bass, Mays and Aton show, Tony Bruno's show, working with guys like Josh Henning and Hunter Brody, who's running things for us, and Jeff Moser and Ryan Rothstein, Tony Bruno, Mike Gill, Harry Mays, Aton Shander, guys like that. I've done stuff in Philadelphia, 97.5, The Fanatic as well. Just a contributor to all outlets of football and sports in general. I do marketing stuff for my mother's company, LSL Brands. So a little bit of everything. I do radio for Learfield Sports, which we cover the Temple games with the great Harry Donahue and Paul Palmer, which is such a pleasure. And we're on a local Philly sports radio for that. And then I coach football at Tideman Middle School, which has been a pleasure to volunteer and coach 7th and 8th grade football. It's down in Lower Cape May, where the place where Matt Caesar went, the Villanova standout a couple of years back now, probably 10 years back. Matt's been win a World Series with the Cubs and is bounced around the minor leagues, potential guest to come on the show as well. So that's really what I've been doing now, just my hand in a little bit of everything. And then right now, while this show's recording, I may get a call from the XFL and be a part of that draft, which will be a pretty cool process. But we will keep you guys informed with that as well. So something that I've been doing now. But my journey, my life, I'm from outside of Philadelphia, about an hour, Bucks County, Pennsylvania, Doylestown to be exact. I made a tough decision as a child, as a kid, a 12, 13, 14-year-old, that I wanted to play in the NFL, and that's what I'm going to put all my chips towards. And I have parents that didn't look at me like I was crazy, which I'm very fortunate. They said, Colin, whatever it takes, whatever you need to get there, we'll make it possible. So I decided to go to Archbishop Wood High School. It was the best thing for me academically and football-wise at the time, a little bit of change. What that change got, as my father retired from the company he worked with at the time, was my dad driving me to school every day. And that sounds like a normal thing. But it was a 20-minute drive. And on that 20 to 25-minute drive, we listened to Mike and Mike. And that's where I fell in love with radio. And that's where I fell in love with sports talk. And that's where I started getting my takes from, and how I talk and how I articulate is all because of that. I didn't notice that until I interviewed Mike Golick Jr. on this very podcast, the former version of it. This is a new version of it. And I was like,
the XFL, we had the original XFL, and now we're bringing it back.
We're bringing it back. Like, yeah. So I said to Mike Golick Jr., I'm like, thank you. And he's just like, for what? I'm like, he's like, I grew up the same way, driving to school, listening to my dad.
Well, and I don't want to cut you off real quick, but these are the type of stories that we're going to let people in on is, how do you go from high school to Division I to now what's next, what life is like in that period. Now I'm training. People just feel like, oh, you were in an NFL camp. You must have money. You must have great stuff happening. Like, these are the kind of stories that we're going to try to, get out on this Not For Long Sports podcast. Is, yes, I work in sports, but it's not always glamorous, but there's so many journeys along the way. You have so many journeys yourself, just being you, to get to, you just mentioned a bunch of different things that you have done. And you're a young guy still trying to figure out, where am I going in sports?
No question. And we're going to have guys on, like, agents, front office members that I talk to, maybe to break down some of the off the field stuff about NFL players. Not all of them are rich. The money's not guaranteed, folks. So we will break into that, dive into it, and we'll have some great guests to articulate.
So real quick, Colin, tell you played high school. You decided to go to Florida and played for the Gators for a year. Kind of start there and kind of take us to where you're sitting in this seat right now.
Yeah. So after I finished at Archbishop Wood, we won a state title my senior year. It's a pretty amazing thing. Flipped the program around. That's now a national powerhouse. I was an Under Armour All-American. Got recruited by Will Muschamp at the University of Florida, Charlie Weiss, and boom, committed, signed. Here I go. So I go to Florida. I'm training right before at a high school near me in Doylestown. Boom, I break my foot. Okay, fine. I'll be healthy by training camp. I'll be back. I'm in training camp at University of Florida. In the summer training, I feel okay. My foot wasn't feeling right in camp. Got an x-ray. It didn't heal all the way, or it broke, or the screw wasn't right. Whatever it was, Florida wanted to get another surgery. So I had 2 surgeries in about 4 or 5 months, which sets you back tenfold for people that know that type of stuff. It's brutal. The atrophy is brutal. So that put me on the bench. What did I do? Get the schoolwork right. Heavily involved with the media. Heavily involved with the radio show down there in communication. So that's where I was. I was at Florida. I sat the first year and redshirted. We'll dive into that, I'm sure, on other podcasts. That's some crazy stories with that. But fast forward to sophomore year, they fly me out to Nike headquarters, Florida, myself and Naran Ball, who just recently passed away. R.I.P. to Naran. What a great guy. Played in the NFL, had some brain aneurysm issues. Just tough. What a stud. But they fly Naran and I out to Nike, and I get custom cleats and the whole 9. Here I go. I'm coming back. I got healthy feet. Played 3 games, played well against Tennessee at home. What an unbelievable environment. I'm walking home. I'm talking to my parents, walking down beautiful Gainesville, Florida. People are throwing drinks at you. Great game. I'm like literally emotional. My parents like, wow, I finally made it. I'm back. I'm back playing football again. I haven't played football in a year. Fast forward till the next day, I wake up, my foot's bothering me, another one. I'm like, what is this about? Get an X-ray, bipartite sesamoiditis, and a navicular stress fracture, which Joel Embiid had. So I had to sit out for about a year. I got medical.
That sounds like another podcast.
Yes, exactly. So I sit out for a year. I'm going to try to speed through this as much as I can. Sit out for a year, medically disqualified after I fought it forever. The medical team and the team there in Florida decided to move on, which it's another part of the sport where people don't know about. They move on. You're paid. Your school's paid for. You're an entity, but you can't be on the roster, so we can bring in another kid. They brought in another kid who was a top tight end and a friend of mine now, Jake McGee, which we can have him on as well. He now works for the NFL Players Association. What a great guy, and will be a great guest. Played at University of Virginia and Florida, Steelers, everywhere in the league. So I get medically disqualified. I'm banging on the door at UCF. Hey, I was the number 1 tight end in the country coming out of high school. I had 30 scholarships. I'm banging on the door at UCF. A guy recruited me UNC, said, Colin, I can only offer you a walk-on spot. I go to Penn State. They only offer me a walk-on spot. I was devastated. I'm like, are you kidding me? I know I had injuries, but I'm 14, 15 months removed from being the top tight end in the country. I get an offer from Montana through a family friend. The Morningway family puts them in touch. Marty Morningway's been in the NFL, puts me in touch with the Montana staff where he played. And I just decided to stay closer to home, be close to my family. And Matt Rule and the Temple Owls offered me, which changed my life. So that's how I got to Temple. Went on to Temple and had a lot of fun. Got healthy, which was great. Went 6-6 the first year, 10 wins back-to-back years. For the Philly people know, the Penn State win, first time in 70-plus years. We took Notre Dame to the wire on College game day and lost by 4. So my football career was trending. I was trending on the radio as well, doing a lot of spots for Temple football. The media guy at Temple, the great Rich Berg, pushed me in front of the cameras, kind of how I got involved with this again and worked on my tempo and worked on different things to be involved in media, meet guys like you and Hunter, Mike. So that's how I got into that. And then Temple, fast forward, the season ends. A no-name tight end with 4 catches my senior year who blocked and somehow was all conference with 4 catches. I just blocked my butt off, and that's kind of how it worked. But that was what we did as a team. I go work out for the draft, and I work out for the Eagles, Jets, and Giants. Performed pretty well at all 3, but the best with the Giants. They come to my pro day. All's going well. And I ended up with the Giants undrafted. You would have thought I was the first pick the way we partied, but we had a good time down here in Cape May. And went to the Giants, was a part of the offseason there, felt great. Probably looking at a practice squad type spot. If you're looking at the numbers on the roster, which you get into, you're looking at, okay, Evan Ingram's a first-round pick. Red Ellison, they just signed to a contract. There's a couple guys that don't have any practice squad eligibility left. Maybe I could sneak into that spot. I played 3 plays in the first preseason game against Pittsburgh, which is about right. And I woke up the next morning, went to bed with no pain. I had to get emergency appendectomy. I had the worst pain in my life in my stomach. I was running around New York City, taking laxatives, trying to figure out what was wrong, get rushed to the ER, and I get cut 48 hours later by the Chicago Bears. Didn't get any money. If you get hurt on the job, like workman's comp, you get paid to leave in the NFL. That's how it is. But mine was non-football related, so that's kind of the nature of the beast with that. We can get into that. So get cut home for 10, 12, whatever weeks. Week 8 comes around of the NFL. Zach Miller gets hurt in Chicago. I go out there for a workout with 4 guys, win the workout. 8 weeks in the practice squad, got cut for 24 hours in that period. We'll discuss what that's about later on. And I got signed to a futures contract. At the time, I thought this was all normal. This is what happens for guys like me, tight ends like me at the bottom of the NFL trying to get in. I find out later it's really not. It was a blessing. And whatever. Long story short, did a little time with the Bears. I was there for a calendar year, was a part of the new Matt Nagy era and a part of that roster, which I think is top 3 in the NFL. And got cut from them at the end of training camp 2 seasons ago. Matt Nagy's first year. This is his second year. And, so that was kind of the story of the NFL. And then had some workouts this past year in June and July with 3 different teams, Detroit, the Giants, and New Orleans. I was in the AAF before that when the league folded, so we'll dive into that as well. That was fantastic. Now the XFL. And still alive in the football world, still pressing, still the same goals, still the same aspirations on the field while keeping the burners hot off the field, because it's really easy to do that while being in the media where we can be at home. I can still train. I worked out this morning, be able to talk to you guys a couple hours later. I'm fortunate to be a part of this podcast. That's my story in a nutshell, as quick as possible. And again, I'm really excited for what's ahead. I think you guys are really going to enjoy the guests on this podcast, the stories that are going to come along with it, because that's really what we're here to tell.
Very good stuff. In fact, we got a lot of topics just based on Colin's experiences that we're going to be kind of diving into with great guests who have shared his experiences. And, we will certainly tie it all into what it's like working in sports. I'll tell my story in just a minute, but when Colin and I came up with this idea, I said, we've got to get Hunter Brody to produce this podcast, not because he's just technically smarter than both of us, but because he also has a story of working in sports. He had a goal and a dream of playing professionally in the NHL. And Hunter, why don't you quickly tell your journey in working in sports and how you got to where you are right now?
Yeah, absolutely. I am honored to be the producer / random voice guy on this podcast that has my 2 cents in here as well. And The NHL was always the dream. I wasn't as close as Colin was to getting to that dream, but I definitely put the work in there for that. I spent time playing junior hockey up in the Eastern Hockey League in Vermont for a couple seasons. And from there, I ended up playing Division III NCAA at Stevenson University in Maryland, which is funny because hockey in Maryland's not that big of a thing, but the brand was built there, and it has actually become a very respected program in D3 NCAA. So that was very entertaining, and it was the inaugural season when I went in. So I went in with a big swarm of freshmen, and we were all kind of battling out. It was just interesting to see an organization like that start right from the jump. And, you know, you over-recruit. There's a lot of people who leave because they're unhappy. They were promised this, promised that. But at the end of the day, I stuck around there for about 2 years before I realized how dedicated I was to this sports radio thing. I was in and out of the lineup. And, you know, there were weekends I played both weekend games. There were weekends where I was a healthy scratch. That's part of the business. I was a grindy guy who just chip pucks out and block shots. You know, you got to have those type of players. So, you know, I was okay with being in and out of the lineup, but when it was going into my junior year, I realized, like, I am in love with sports radio. I would listen 24/7, these 10-hour bus rides. I would download all these podcasts of these shows. I would have a notebook, and I would have hosts, and I would have pros and cons of things that I liked and things that I didn't like, and I would study these hosts because I wanted to do this so badly. I went into my coach's office going into my junior year, and I said, Coach, like, I love this. I love hockey, but I am, like, 90% in right now. I'm like 85% in because I'm just so passionate. And I started up this YouTube channel where after every Eagles, Flyers, Sixers, Phillies game, I'm screaming in my college apartment, going crazy, making these faces, just going nuts. And with where I was in the lineup and with where I needed to get to, you know, really be in every day, I had to put 300% into it. And I just wasn't there. And I was my whole life until that moment. I realized maybe it's not hockey anymore. So, with that being said, he respects it. He listens to me on 97.3 on the weekends with the Pete Thompson show and Countdown to Kickoff. He texts me one weekend and goes, Are you on the radio? He didn't even put it together until he was actually just listening himself. And I was like, yeah. And he was like, wow, you sound great. And it's just funny how it all works. And he's really supportive. So it's just funny how it all plays out. And so, yeah, that's how I got to where I am now, and I ended up getting an internship with the Mays and Aton show on 97.3, and it all ended up playing out to where it is now, and I'm a part of the team, so couldn't be happier.
Hey, Hunter, and I just want to clarify, I think for people listening out there, Division III hockey is a little different. I'm a hockey junkie. You guys will come to find out. I'm probably the only player.
Which is hilarious to me, by the way, because now that I'm in this field, hockey, I love the game, but it's just not football, basketball. It's just not. It's just fun.
I love it. I played for 10 years and had to be convinced by my head coach, Steve Devlin, who's now the defensive coordinator at Ursinus University. This is my high school head coach, said, hey, dude, you got to hang him up. You're a football player who's going to play a little basketball in the offseason to stay in shape. So that's where I'm a hockey junkie. I love it. My cousin played at Salve, Virginia, was a captain there, and took the team to the lengths that it was never supposed to be. So, and I grew my college hockey fandom. But Salve was Division III. I come to learn that Division III hockey is not like Division III sports in most colleges. There's only Division I and Division III hockey. Hunter, you can talk more about this. But to clarify, like, Hunter wasn't just like a Division III like beer league guy, and that's not a shot at beer.
No, and by the way, part of my story, and I'll get to that in a bit, is the first game I had ever broadcast was I got to figure out a way to get on the air. How do I get on the air? Well, at West Virginia, they have a club hockey team. Well, who knew that the club hockey team was a highly competitive level of hockey? So I volunteer. You know when the club hockey team plays? Whenever they can get rink time.
11 o'clock at night on Fridays?
Friday night at 11 p.m., yours truly was doing the play-by-play for WVU club hockey. But let me tell you, it was a high level of hockey, man.
It is. No, it definitely is.
Go ahead, Brody.
No, I was just saying it definitely is high-level D1 club hockey. So, and it's funny because being in the hockey world, I got plenty of buddies that play juniors, and it's like, do I want to go to D3 at this smaller school and it's NCAA, or do I want to go play at West Virginia where it's competitive D1 club, but I still have the atmosphere of this sick party school? So I know a ton of really good hockey players that go that route because it's still competitive as hell, and you have that party of a college. Because Stevenson, it was D3 NCAA, but 4,000 students. It feels like a glorified high school in terms of actual college life. So it is respected, the players that go there.
So Hunter played hockey. Colin was football. And I migrated to West Virginia to play baseball. I played baseball, all growing up. I played all four sports, really. Even played a little hockey. But baseball was clearly, the sport that I was best at. And the size for me in football was going to hold me back. So I ended up getting recruited by a bunch of Division III, small Division I schools for baseball. And I decided to go and walk on at West Virginia. I had known the coach through some camps, and he invited me to be an invited walk on, what it's called. So you're kind of like, they don't have anything for you. You're not an unknown guy, but you're kind of like, we know you. You can walk on if you'd like.
Preferred walk-on, they call them in football. Preferred walk-ons in football.
Yeah, sure. So I get out there, and about 3 pitches into this tryout, which let me tell you, the first day I got home, I laid on the bed, I looked at the ceiling and said, I don't want to go back. I mean, the difference between a high school practice and a Division I baseball program was unbelievable. And I'm staring at the ceiling, and I'm like, I don't want to go back. The next day, I go back, I get up on the mound, I throw a pitch, and poof, like a puff of air coming out of my hand. I said, something's not right, and this isn't for me. At that moment, I realized I don't think I love playing baseball anymore. And while I still coach because I love the game, a friend of mine who's from Lower Marion, played high school ball with Kobe Bryant, actually. And I had said to him on a Friday night, hey, what are you doing tonight? He says, I have to broadcast a hockey game. And I said, that sounds kind of cool. Like, how do I get involved with this? Go down to the campus radio station. They're always hiring people. So I did. And from that point forward, once I got hired, I never left that building. I was there all the time. Anytime an opening came up, I took it. Do you want to do the sports updates? I'm in. Do you want to host a show? I'll do it. Do you want to do the play-by-play for the baseball team? Yep. Girls basketball. I'm on. Nobody else wanted to do it because, they were out partying or class got in the way. I prioritized this over class. So I would hang out the radio station instead of going to Geology 101. I would hang out the radio station instead of going to Psych 101.
And you didn't get away with that at West Virginia, nowhere else, though.
I didn't do very well in those classes, but I knew that this is where I wanted to be. And from that point forward, I have lived in radio stations all over the place. As soon as I got out of West Virginia, where I did the play-by-play for the baseball team, the hockey team, the football team, the basketball team, I hosted a show out there. I came home. I had said to myself, you know what? I got to get more versatile. I've got to figure out more ways to be hireable. So I started to do some DJ shifts at the college station, put it on a CD, got home, heard an ad on the radio for a DJ, dropped off my CD, got in the car. As soon as I got in the car and pulled out, they called me and said, did you just drop off a CD? I said, yeah. Can you come back? This was Digital 102.7, which was the Howard Stern station in town. 6 months, I did weekend overnights from midnight to 6 a.m. spinning rock tunes. And somebody had a call out on a weekend, so I did a double from midnight to, 6 to 10. So from midnight to 10 in the morning. The consultant at the time heard me and said, who was the guy on Saturday afternoons? They said, that's this new guy, Mike Gill. We're moving him to afternoon drive. So I'm doing 3 to 7 afternoon drive in my hometown on the Howard Stern station. I'm about 22 years old. Think about what that was like. So but I always kind of wanted, yeah, right. I always wanted to kind of get into sports. So there's a guy that my father knew, and I still work with him. He does high school football and basketball games on the radio. Guy named Tom Williams. He runs a place called Prime Events. We still do high school football and basketball games together. I do all the play-by-play for him. And he had this little show in a station in Cape May County. He brings me on with him. He ends up getting a radio station, 1490 The Game, and he's the program director. He makes me the morning show host. So I left all the music stuff to do this. That station went under within about 8 months, had no financial support. I was out of work, I didn't know what I was going to do. A station, ESPN 1450, was on the air. I interviewed for the job. I didn't get it. So I'm out of work. I'm substitute teaching. I'm mowing lawns. I'm doing all the stuff just to figure out. And then there's a station up in Trenton, ESPN 920, that I interview for. They offer me the job. They offer me $40,000. I asked for $45,000. They gave it to the other guy. Well, the other guy happened to be the guy who worked at 1450. So when he left here, this position opened, and I took it for $20,000 less. But I now have a job, and I have now – that station was 1450 AM. We moved to 97.3 FM in 2009, and I have been the host of the show since that time. We've had some of the best ratings. We've had some of the best shows, guests. I've covered the World Series, the Super Bowl, the NBA playoffs, the Stanley Cup finals. I've been to the NCAA tournament. I've covered pretty much every major sports event that there is. I've met guys like Colin who are working their way through sports. I've met guys at the top of the game. I've had some of the biggest interviews, and it's just a blast doing
UFC.
What's that?
UFC.
Oh, yes. I also got – I mean, this is a crazy story.
You got so much going on that you don't even remember what you're doing
That's what we're here for.
Yeah. I also am the voice for CFFC on UFC Fight Pass, and my color commentator is CM Punk. Like, never in my life would I figure I'm going to be doing fights with one of the biggest, pop culture stars that had been out there. I mean, the guy was a WWE champion for years. I mean, he still gets his name chanted in the places when they have events in town. I mean, he's one of the biggest, most recognizable people. When we do shows together, it's amazing how many people come up to him. Never in a million years would I have thought that would happen. But the interesting part is, and this is a great segue to end this and kind of talk about our podcast, Dave Schaller, who works for the Sixers, when he was probably a senior in high school, I was working at 1490 The Game. He reaches out to me and says, I'm a student at Egg Harbor Township High School, and I want to get involved in the industry. I said, kid, you be at the studio at 5:30 in the morning, and if you're there, I'll see that you're serious. I pulled up at 5:30. He was sitting there before me. Dave Schaller is one of the hardest working guys. He was the right-hand man to Dana White at the UFC. I've had Dana White on the show. He made a $10,000 donation on the air on my show for one of the charities that Dave and I work together with. Dave has since left the UFC and gone to the Sixers. He has an interest in CFFC, and he hired me to be the voice of the CFFC. So this is what the podcast is about, working in sports. And I've always, one of the missions that I've had when I took this job is I want to give people opportunities. I want to give young guys opportunities because I got opportunities. And if you have talent and you're a young guy, I want to give you the platform to be able to do it. I might not have a lot of money to pay you or any at all, but you do with the opportunity that you get. And in this industry, if you get an opportunity, you take it. And that's something that I've learned, and I've always tried to if there are people that work for me that feel like they're not getting treated fairly, that's because you're looking at it the wrong way. I'm always open to give people opportunities, and you do with the opportunity what you want with it. And that's where you will be successful in this business. And I've been able to do it at the same station, which is almost unheard of, for about 15 years. Pretty crazy.
Good stuff, Mike. That's awesome. That's fantastic. And again, you guys are starting to get the gist of what we're doing, what our stories are, which is, hey, we've been involved in a little bit of everything. We've touched on people along the way that we think would be great guests to come on the podcast and or just tell their story and grow a following for this podcast where it's inclusive with the people listening. Tweet at us. A YouTube channel's coming. We're on Instagram. It's going to be a unique way, really, for you guys to interact with us, suggest guests to come on.
Yeah.
Like myself and Hunter have created a nice little network that we can reach out to people on. So we're excited, and obviously got to hear a little bit of Mike's story and mine and Hunter's, and I think it's going to get off the ground starting next week to a great start.
Yeah, and just some of the things that we're going to touch on, just to kind of give you guys a little nugget of different topics that are going to be, the pay for play. Colin played Division I football. What's his thoughts on paying athletes at the college level? Tanking. Colin's a guy that if he makes a roster, he's going to be, as he realizes, a bottom of the roster guy.
I was a part of I don't know about tanking, but I was a part of a team going in the wrong direction at the professional level.
Well, we'll tell that kind of story. And as they're tanking in college football, there was an interesting tweet over the weekend about that with this new, portal where you can redshirt. So that's those kind of topics. Leaving early for the XFL draft, is that something that could be, the NBA draft? I'm very passionate about that conversation. That's a topic we're going to get into. The NFL refs, $1 billion industry. What's going on with the refs? How could that be fixed? Stuff like that. Obviously, the inside of playing in the AAF, the XFL. What's it like to go through a training camp? I asked Colin before we started recording, those helmets behind them, do you get to keep your helmet? These are things that people, the layman probably doesn't know. Like, where do you get all these helmets? Is it because, those type of inside stories that we're going to uncover? You'll hear from awesome guests and awesome stories. And sometimes the best stories come from the least known guys. And that's what this podcast is all about. It's called Not For Long Sports Podcast. Make it a daily part of your routine, and it's going to be dropping very shortly. But that's just a little bit about producer Hunter Brody, Colin Thompson, and I'm your host, Mike Gill. This is the Not For Long Sports Podcast.
Thanks for listening to the Not For Long Podcast. Remember to rate, review, and subscribe.